The most terrifying creature that's ever walked the face of the earth was, unfortunately and unsurprisingly, a spider. Well, it was spider-like at least. It was a type of creature known as a megarachne, an ancestor of an extinct group of arthropods. When the scientists first discovered it, they misidentified it as an ordinary spider, believing it to be the biggest one that ever existed at a whopping 21 inches. If the original classification had been correct and this thing was just a spider, it would have been big enough to hunt common house cats. Thankfully, we don't have to worry about them anymore. In truth, it was more like a giant sea scorpion with long legs that it used to chow down on critters in swampy environments. It came into existence during the late Carboniferous era, about 300 million years ago, and it lived in what is now known as North America. But even though this creature wasn't technically a spider, it's still good that it doesn't exist today because it would be absolutely terrifying. Nobody wants to encounter an almost 2-foot-long creepy crawly with spiky legs like a scorpion with a fat spider body. That literally sounds like a nightmare come to life. Crayfish are kind of disturbing, no? Everyone gets a little creeped out by their strange bodies, which look like weird insects. Fortunately, they're all small, right? Right? That's what you thought. In Kentucky, a utility worker discovered a crayfish so big it could pass as a lobster. To give you an idea of just how big the crayfish was, also known as a crawdad, on average, a crayfish is about 3 inches or 7 centimeters long. There are some species that even grow to be 6 inches or 15 centimeters. This one was a whopping 10 inches or 25 centimeters from tail to claw. Even Western Kentucky University biology professor Steve Husky said he could hardly believe it when he first saw the thing. He thought someone was playing a trick on him. How did the massive crayfish get so massive? Nobody's really sure. It was pulled out of the water filtration system in the intake plant in Bowling Green by one of the workers. So far as we know, this is the biggest crayfish ever caught in Kentucky. Steve from the university even contacted the Illinois Natural History Survey, who happened to have a collection of over 90,000 different crustaceans. The crayfish proved to be bigger than anything in the collection.
Out of all the giant monsters to have ever lived in the Amazon, the legendary Titanoboa is the most gigantic of them all. This enormous snake was first discovered fossilized in Colombia, and it has since revealed an image of what the region looked like thousands of years ago. It turns out that the Amazon rainforest was ruled by beasts far larger than anyone had previously imagined. The Titanoboa was longer than a school bus and at least as heavy as a small car. It ruled the tropical ecosystems of South America 6 million years after the fall of the most legendary dinosaurs of all, according to a report from the journal Nature. Based on the fossils found of the Titanoboa, it would have been around 45 feet long. That would have made the snake as long as the Tyrannosaurus rex. The snake would have lived in the same environments as the modern anaconda. It would have slithered through waterways and hung out in lakes, eating pretty much everything it wanted. The snake would have been so big that it couldn't have fit through a standard doorway without quite a bit of squeezing. Thankfully, this monstrous beast is no longer alive today, otherwise nobody would ever go to the Amazon rainforest. All throughout the Amazon rainforest, there is one persistent legend. The myth is about a creature known as the mapinguari, also known as the sloth monster. Not just a giant sloth, but an actual sloth monster. It's a very popular legend in Brazilian culture, and the tales persist even today. There have been reported sightings of this gigantic beast almost every year, but unfortunately the true evidence is lacking. But let's start the story at the beginning. The sloth monster has been around for at least a few thousand years, and it apparently began life as an Amazonian shaman who found the secret to immortality. This shaman became smug, and the gods punished him by turning him into a giant sloth and banishing him to wander aimlessly through the forest for eternity. While that obviously didn't happen, the truth is that the giant sloth monster could in fact just be a giant sloth. These creatures did indeed exist. The giant ground sloth has been extinct for thousands of years, but when alive it grew to an amazing size of around 10 feet when standing on its hind legs. That makes it a pretty huge monster. It is possible that people have throughout the centuries mistaken the legendary sloth monster for a real ground sloth, though it's unlikely any of these animals are still alive, even hiding in the density of the jungle.
4 miles or 6 kilometers beneath the surface of the ocean off the coast of New Zealand, a giant crustacean unlike anything you've ever seen before was just discovered. It's being called a supergiant, and for good reason. The creature is a type of amphipod. In the wild, these things are normally just over half an inch or 1 centimeter long. The ones 4 miles or 6 kilometers deep were found to be over a foot long or 30 centimeters. That's over 10 times normal length. According to Alan Jameson from the University of Aberdeen, it was like finding a cockroach bigger than your foot. Obviously, if these creatures roamed around above ground, they would be some of the most disgusting things you could ever imagine encountering. And millions of years ago, they may very well have lived above the surface. But now, they sit at the bottom of the sea, waiting to feast on whatever floats their way. How did they find such amazing crustaceans? Scientists used special metal traps mounted with cameras to see what was on the bottom of the ocean floor. What they found was a whole army of these monsters. They apparently live at the bottom of ocean trenches and in the deepest parts of the world's oceans. They thrive in places where the pressure is 1,000 times greater than at sea level. What's really amazing is that nobody found these huge animals until just now. There was once a millipede that lived on our planet. This insect was so big that it would have made even the bravest person alive pee their pants without question. The millipede was larger than any living human, the largest land invertebrate to ever exist. The millipede was on average at least 6 feet long and more than 1.5 feet wide. Although scientists say it probably could have grown to be over 7 feet in length, that's taller than the average NBA basketball player. It's called the Arthropleura, and it dominated the lush forests of North America over 300 million years ago. At the time this terrifying beast was alive, nothing else, on land at least, could match its size. It was a giant, literally. It also had no known predators, so it's strange that the behemoth insect went extinct. Scientists were able to take a look at the creature's armor thanks to some well-preserved fossils, discovering that the armor was only a few millimeters thick. This is quite a bit thinner than the shells on modern crustaceans like shrimp or crabs, meaning it didn't really need to protect itself from anything trying to eat it. The armor was more or less just for a show of power. To give you an idea about how truly massive this millipede was, when researchers in New Mexico discovered ancient tracks left behind by the Arthropleura, they described them as being similar to tire tracks left behind by a giant truck. Now that's a big bug.
Let's change gears now and move from legend to fact. The giant Amazon leech is one of the most terrifying nightmare creatures in the world. While it's not a giant like the Titanoboa or the sloth monster, for a leech it is a verifiable behemoth. The giant leech was thought to be extinct way back in the 1890s, but it was rediscovered in the 1970s in French Guiana. There is now a successful breeding colony at UC Berkeley. When talking size, the giant Amazon leech can grow to be almost 20 inches in length. That makes it just about 2 feet long. Imagine a leech the size of your forearm trying to suck you dry of all of your blood. It's absolutely terrifying. The leeches are a greyish-brown colour, and rather than bite onto you, these buggers actually use a 6-inch tube, kind of like a straw, to stab you and suck out your blood. The leech then produces an anticoagulant from its saliva that keeps your blood flowing. If you got covered in enough of these leeches while swimming in a river, you'd be sucked dry.
Off the coast of Wales, a marine biologist stumbled upon a monstrous lobster claw that could be proof of a literal giant lobster skulking around somewhere along the Welsh coastline. Of course, it probably died after losing its claw, but there could be others like it. The claw measured 8 inches or 20 centimeters. This is outstanding because when placed next to an ordinary lobster, the claw is bigger than the animal. The owner of the claw is probably around 3 feet, which is 3 times bigger than your average lobster. That's right, it would have been a fierce match for any human, especially if that human were diving into its territory. The discovery is made by Sean Crinan, who runs his own oyster farm in a small Welsh village. He accidentally pulled the lobster claw onto his vessel while fishing for oysters. In an email to Newsweek, Sean claimed he had never seen anything even remotely as large as the claw. Even though he didn't find the actual beast that it belonged to, there's no doubt that it was huge. He estimated the lobster to be at least 50 years old, though it could be significantly older. As you may already know, lobsters molt to grow older, and they never stop growing their entire lives. That means that ancient, vicious giant lobsters could very well live deep under the sea, where humans never see. A few years ago, a movie came out called The Meg. It featured a massive prehistoric shark beast that terrorized scientists and the ocean. This fictional movie actually held a few truths, but most of it was just for show. And while it may be intriguing to think a megalodon could still be living in our oceans today, the truth is that scientists have found zero evidence to support the possibility. It's also true that if a megalodon did live in our oceans still, we would probably know about it. These prehistoric monsters could grow to be over 60 feet in length, like great white sharks, except the size of mythical dragons. In fact, the great white shark is only 1/3 the length of the megalodon. For those who are worried about swimming in the ocean because of a shark attack, the possibility of being attacked by a megalodon would basically make every ocean in the world a no-swim zone. Say bye-bye to sunset walks on the beach. In fact, if megalodons were still around, these prehistoric predators may have stopped us from ever exploring the ocean to begin with. The second someone built a boat and set sail, they probably would have been eaten, their boat and all, by a giant megalodon. Thankfully, these prehistoric sharks went extinct about 3.6 million years ago. Scientists believe they were actually wiped out by the great white shark. And so, the sharks we know and love became so numerous and so skilled at hunting that they ended up stealing all the food from the larger megalodons. That's just natural selection for you. What would you do if you saw a megalodon in the water? Let us know your plan of action in the comments down below. If you liked the video so far, make sure you subscribe to see more.
There are 3 types of manatees in the world, and one of them lives in the tributaries of the Amazon River in Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, Brazil, and Guyana. These are some of the biggest marine creatures that make their home in the Amazon jungle. In terms of sheer mass, manatees are huge. They can weigh at least half a ton. And while not inherently dangerous, they are certainly strange. They have a snout very similar to that of a hippo, and they have limbs that look more like paddles. But rather than terrorize the rivers of the Amazon like a nasty black caiman, manatees prefer to just eat water lettuce all throughout the day. In a single day, these weird river monsters can eat at least 8% of their body weight according to the World Wildlife Foundation. Not monstrous in a scary way, but they are certainly the largest and heaviest animal currently living in the Amazonian jungle.
Back in 2012, there was a Tasmanian king crab named Claude who was saved from certain death after being caught by a fisherman who was shocked by his outrageous size. Instead of just cooking the crab in the world's largest pot, the fisherman sold Claude to a British aquarium for $3,000. The crab had to make a 29-hour plane journey from Australia to England, where he was to be put on display. Claude weighs 15 pounds or 7 kilos and measures over a foot. Even more shocking is that he hasn't even fully grown yet. Once he finally stops growing, he'll probably be at least 30 pounds, which would make him a feast for a family-sized gathering, at least if that family likes to eat crabs. Put it this way, he's bigger than most people's dogs. As of right now, Claude is the biggest crab anywhere on display in the United Kingdom. He's so big that you could make 160 crab cakes out of him, although he'd probably prefer if you didn't. He's also 100 times larger than the shore crab normally found in the United Kingdom. He's on display at the Sea Life Centre in Dorset, housed inside of a specialised tank 10 feet or 3 meters tall and 6 feet or 2 meters wide. An international team of scientists recently discovered a giant primordial worm, a creature that is thankfully now extinct. It was researchers from the University of Bristol who uncovered the ancient worm fossil, which is now stored at a museum in Ontario. The fossil had been at the museum since the 1990s, but nobody had known exactly what it was for years. Finally, they identified it as an extinct bristleworm from nearly 400 million years ago. This specimen was a distant relative of our modern earthworms and leeches, but it had the biggest jaws ever recorded for a worm. It may not sound big, but their jaws reached about 1 centimeter in length. This is big enough that you would have been able to see them with your naked eye. Just imagine looking at an earthworm in your garden and seeing a big toothy grin on its wormy face. No thank you, we'll pass. Modern worms have jaws so small that you need a microscope to look at them. While the bristleworm may not have been the biggest threat, we're still glad it's extinct, just so there's one less creepy crawly to worry about while gardening.
Now let's check out the largest land predator in the Amazon. I'm of course talking about the jaguar. It's the largest species of cat in the Americas and the 3rd biggest cat in the world after the lion and the tiger. While the jaguar may seem oddly adorable in photos, it's the last thing you would want sneaking up on you in the middle of a dark night while camping in the jungle. The jaguar has so much strength in its jaws that it could easily crush your skull with just one bite. As cool as it would be to think that there are mysterious monsters skulking around in the jungle, the truth is that the jaguar is the apex land predator in all of the Americas. The jaguar is also in a steep decline, with not very many of them left because of territory loss and poaching. But that doesn't mean you should let your guard down. A jaguar can make an easy meal out of any stray traveller not prepared.
There is a giant and pretty terrifying monster living in the waters of Indonesia. It's a type of crustacean known as an isopod, and a big one was recently pulled out of the water. These insect-like marine animals live at the bottom of the sea and grow to be as large as puppies. There are about 10,000 species of isopod living both on land and in the ocean. You're probably familiar with the ones in your garden, the little pill bugs that aren't even as big as your pinky fingernail. Well, the isopod pulled out of the waters of Indonesia is the newest and biggest species ever seen, and it measures 13 inches or 30 centimeters in length. That's way bigger than your hand, and probably about half the length of your forearm. Isopods are strange crustaceans. They have 2 pairs of antennae, a segmented body broken into 7 sections, way too many legs, and eyes buried in their face, making them look like monsters. This one was pulled up from a depth of 4,000 feet or 1,200 meters during the South Java Deep-Sea Biodiversity Expedition. They're mostly bottom feeders, eating whatever they can find at the bottom of the ocean and scavenging carcasses whenever possible. Have you ever seen a disturbing-looking crustacean in your life? Where was it? What was it? What did you think of it? Were you scared? Tell me about it in the comments below. Then remember to subscribe to Epic Wildlife if you haven't already for more insane videos just like this one. If you were to go on the Museum of Australia's webpage, you'd find information about the drop bear, the most outrageous marsupial in our country's history. According to the museum, the drop bear has colourful orange fur, and it's between the size of a dog and a leopard. The bear used to feast on the flesh of kangaroos and wallabies, and it's also wildly aggressive towards foreigners, which right away seems like a red flag. The truth is, drop bears don't exist, but us Australians have been making up stories about them for decades to scare tourists. The myth is that drop bears are relatives of modern koalas and that they ambush human victims from the tops of trees, dropping from above to attack unsuspecting visitors, unless you cover yourself in Vegemite. But hey, here's where things get even weirder. Nobody knows where the myth of the drop bear came from. We've been talking about these jungle predators since at least the 1970s, but the legend could go back much further. This has led to speculation that sometime in Australia's not-so-distant past, maybe a few hundred years ago, there really were killer koalas living in the trees, pouncing on the innocent. And maybe there still are.
On Earth today, we have giant armadillos living in the Amazon jungle that are surprisingly huge. Modern giant armadillos can weigh up to 180 pounds and be 5 feet in height. They even have claws that are roughly 8 inches in length, making them excellent for slicing up humans. But rewind the clock 11,000 years ago and you will discover the true giant armadillo, scientifically known as the glyptodon. This armadillo lived in the Amazon jungle and was so large that humans could use its shell as a house. A small family could literally live inside the shell of this armadillo because it was so impossibly massive. It was about as big as a car and could club a person to death with its tail. This beast would have lived during the time the giant sloth monster also roamed the Amazon, right at the end of the era of monstrous beasts. Another interesting fact about the Glyptodon is that it actually looked more like a turtle than a modern armadillo. This is because it had an armoured back that consisted of at least 1,000 bony plates all fit snugly together.
Crayfish are violent fighters down below the surface of the ocean, and this one showed that he was a survivor against all odds. Yet another massive crayfish was recently discovered, this one from a rainforest in Tasmania. The giant crayfish was found with only one claw, located during a scientific mission. To date, it's the second biggest Tasmanian giant freshwater crayfish ever captured in the area. It may have been the biggest, but it only had one claw. Do you think it lost its other one in a fight with a rival? Hey, it's entirely possible. This type of crayfish has been a priority species for the last 20 years as its numbers have been dwindling. Activists are trying to protect a small area of 30,000 hectares where crayfish and other animals can live in peace without logging, but nothing has really been done by the government to make this happen. We all know something should be done, but bureaucracy moves slowly. The crayfish here are huge, though nobody could say why they continue to grow so big. Regardless, this one is absolutely fascinating. If only it could talk. The epicyan was the original ancestor of the dog we all know and love today, living across the plains of North America from between 15 to 5 million years ago. This was during the Miocene era. And if you think about it, ancient direwolves were big before they went extinct about 10,000 years ago, and the epicyan was at least twice their size. These incredible canines were about 5 feet in length and weighed up to 300 pounds. They ate a pure diet of just meat, and scientists know them as the largest prehistoric dog that's ever existed. Because the epicyan was a true canid, it is a direct ancestor of wolves, hyenas, and every dog you see while walking around the park today. But it was a completely different monster. Unbelievably powerful with jaws that could easily crush a human skull. But unfortunately, we don't actually know all that much about these ancient animals. Not too many fossils have been found, and so scientists haven't been able to decipher their behavior. We don't know if they exclusively feasted on dead animals like modern hyenas, if they hunted in packs like grey wolves, or if they were solitary creatures like big cats. The only thing scientists can agree on is that they were outrageously scary and dangerous.
The biggest fish in the Amazon jungle is the arapaima, and it's one of the scariest things ever. These huge fish are native to the Amazon River basin, and they can reach an outstanding weight of at least 400 pounds. These fish are too big to catch. Imagine trying to wrestle a 400-pound freak fish out of a river. They can be at least 10 feet long and are so strong that if one of them hit you square in the chest with its face while in the water, it could knock the wind out of you, leave serious bruising, and maybe even shatter your ribs. In terms of giant Amazon monsters, the arapaima fits the description perfectly. However, a recent report from NBC News claims that these dangerous fish are already extinct in some parts of the Amazon. In other parts, their numbers are rapidly dwindling. That's a shame, as these are extremely unique animals. They're able to breathe air using a combination of a lung and gill system, making them extraordinary in the animal kingdom.
Recently, a giant spider crab was captured off the coast of Japan in Suruga Bay. The crab was caught in February and estimated to be roughly 40 years old. As you may already know, spider crabs are the biggest types of crabs in the world. They can even grow to be bigger than most people. This one, which was happily nicknamed Crab Kong, measured a claw span of 8 feet or 2.5 meters. That is the space between its two claws. When walking across the bottom of the ocean, this thing would look like one of those ambling alien ships from the War of the Worlds. It weighed 33 pounds or 15 kilos and could live for another 60 years. And while this wasn't the biggest spider crab ever, as some specimens have been captured that have a claw span over 12 feet or 4 meters, it's still nothing to sneeze at. In fact, the Weymouth Sea Life Centre in the UK was so impressed that they had the crab shipped from Japan all the way to England to put it on display. I'm not sure what it is about England buying all the biggest crustaceans in the world and putting them in their aquariums, but they've now got a pretty neat collection at this point. There was once a monster very much like Godzilla who lurked in the ancient seas. The beast was only recently identified by scientists who found its fossilized skull in Argentina. It was a distant relative of our modern crocodile, an ancient marine monster about 12 feet long, with flippers like a dolphin and a fin tail like a fish. The monster is called Gigantoycus andinensis, and it lived only in the water. So there was no worries about the monster attacking Tokyo. What made the creature truly unusual is that it had a snout like a T-Rex, making it look like an aquatic Godzilla. It was almost like a mix between a Tyrannosaurus and a giant crocodile. According to Diego Pohl with the Ohio State University, the prehistoric marine predator was definitely part of the crocodile family tree. But it was unlike any other crocodiles that had been found. When it was alive 135 million years ago, other crocodiles had skinny snouts with teeth like needles for catching fish. But this crocodile had a short snout with large serrated teeth for terrorizing large sea creatures, leaving its origin and disappearance a mystery. But perhaps we shouldn't ask too many questions, and just be grateful we no longer have to worry about Gigantoycus andinensis while we swim.
Howler monkeys are the largest of all monkeys currently found in the Amazon jungle. While you might not think of a howler monkey as a giant monster, these are the biggest, baddest, scariest and loudest tree-swinging monsters in the Amazon jungle. According to New Scientist, male howler monkeys are actually able to make one of the loudest noises of any terrestrial animal. They make such a horrifying noise that you would probably poop your pants if you heard one while walking through the jungle. If you didn't know any better, you would think there was a 10-foot gorilla somewhere nearby ready to rip your arms off. Of course, the howler monkeys use their awful screaming to scare off other males, but they can still make the hair on your neck stand up in fear. You'll probably never encounter a howler monkey in the Amazon, as they live way up in the canopy, but their roars will haunt your dreams. If you're curious about how they make such a devastating roar, even more horrifying than that of a tiger or a lion, it's because howler monkeys have specially enlarged bones inside their necks that are used for holding a sound-amplifying air sac. They're one of the only animals that have evolved such a strange mechanism.
You may have seen the story circulating about a couple of Canadians on the Atlantic coast who managed to catch a shrimp that weighed 320 pounds. They apparently captured the rhino-sized shrimp while fishing near the St. Lawrence River. The shrimp measured 9 feet, or 3 meters, and was apparently the biggest crustacean ever caught. As much as I hate to break it to you, dear viewer, this never actually happened, at least in the news story as it was written. There is no shrimp that scientists have yet discovered that even comes close to being that big. It would be easy to imagine a massive creature like this sitting below the surface, but the image was photoshopped in this case. The original photograph was that of 2 men holding a Wells catfish in Italy back in 2013. Somebody switched the catfish to a shrimp and uploaded the pictures online. It would be cool to think that there were monster shrimp like this living in our rivers, but nowadays there's no such thing. However, millions of years ago, it's possible that creatures like this did actually live on the ocean floor or in lakes around the world. Dinosaurs probably did feast on giant undersea creatures like this, but we're safe from them today. And I think that's for the best. After all, would you really want a 9-foot or 3-meter long shrimp nibbling on your toes every time you took a swim? Yeah, me neither. Gigantoycus was not the type of creature you would ever want to meet in a dark alley at night. This ancient extinct ape was absolutely giant, weighing over a ton, and standing, no joke, over 9 feet tall. Picture a gorilla standing on top of Bigfoot and you might be getting close to its height. This is about how large the Gigantoycus was. Fossils of this extinct ape were first found in a Chinese cave back in 1935. So far, its bones have been dated back 1.9 million years. However, very few have ever been found. For this reason, nobody knows exactly where the giant monkey fits on the ape family tree. Based on its teeth, scientists believe his closest living relative is the orangutan. They say these 2 apes separated along their paths of evolution from one common ancestor about 12 million years ago. We don't know exactly what happened to this giant ape, how widely dispersed it was around the globe, or even how it behaved. All we know is that it definitely existed, a gigantic ape more like a dinosaur or King Kong than a monkey. A few miners in Alberta, Canada were digging for gemstones when they accidentally came across a prehistoric monster that once dominated the sea. They found an almost complete skeleton of a marine predator called a Tyosaurus, a type of mosasaur that lived 70 million years before today. And yeah, you should be happy that this ferocious thing no longer exists. It would have made a trip to the beach a guaranteed death sentence, just like so many other creatures on this list. According to Donald Henderson from the Royal Tyrrell Museum in Drumheller, Alberta, the marine dinosaur was at least 23 feet long. It was an apex predator that mostly ate turtles, fish, and other dinosaurs of its own kind. So yeah, it was also a cannibal. It had backwards teeth on the roof of its mouth, so that whatever it took into its jaws had no way to get out. Whatever the giant beast swallowed, it had no choice but to go down its throat and into its belly. This creature lived during a time when much of Canada was actually underwater, which is why its fossil was discovered by miners digging for gems in the desert. Which one of these extinct monsters do you think was the most frightening? Are there any you wish still existed today? Let us know in the comments, and thanks for watching. If you haven't already, remember to hit that subscribe button to help support the channel. See you next time. Bye!